My life didn't end with a bang, but with the quiet, deadly scrape of a pen. My own daughter placed a contract in front of me on the day of my husband's funeral, and with a single signature, I unknowingly sentenced myself to a life I didn't recognize. She stole my home, my name, and tried to bury me alive. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, is that she buried me on top of a secret far older and more monstrous than her own greed. This is the story of how I clawed my way out. If you believe a woman's strength only grows with age, follow my story. Like, share, and hit that notification bell, because the truth is about to be exhumed, and you won't want to miss a single moment. The day they lowered my husband into the ground, the air in our house was suffocating. It was a physical weight, a concoction of cloying white lilies and the sickly sweet perfume of manufactured sympathy. People I hadn't seen in 20 years drifted through the rooms like polite ghosts, murmuring condolences that sounded like lines from a script. They spoke of James in hushed, reverent tones, a pillar of the community, a brilliant architect, a devoted husband. I stood by the grand fireplace, a fixture in my own home, nodding and accepting their practiced sorrow. 60 years of marriage. It felt less like a partnership and more like a long, drawn-out sentence I had finally served. Now, I was supposed to be free. I felt only hollow. My daughter, Emma, moved through the crowd with an elegance that was both breathtaking and chilling. Her black dress was perfectly tailored, her grief a mask she wore as expertly as her makeup. She found me in the study, the one room in the house that was purely James's domain. It smelled of him, old leather, pipe tobacco, and a faint, metallic tang I could never place. He had built this house, designed every inch of it, and his presence was stamped into the very wood grain. Emma closed the heavy oak door behind her, shutting out the murmur of the wake. The sudden silence was more profound than the noise. "Mom," she said, her voice a soft, sympathetic whisper. She came around the massive mahogany desk, James's throne, and laid a sheaf of papers on the polished surface. "I know today is difficult, but there's a bit of business we need to handle." I looked at the documents. They were dense with legal text, a language I didn't speak. My mind was a fog, a landscape of gray ash where vibrant memories used to be. I just wanted to go upstairs, close the door to my room, and let the silence swallow me whole. "What is this, Emma?" I asked, my voice thin, brittle. "Just some estate papers," she murmured. Her manicured finger painted a demure, mournful nude, tapping a signature line at the bottom of a page. "It's a formality. Liam's lawyer said it's the best way to structure things. It puts the house into a trust, to protect it from probate taxes. It simplifies everything." She looked at me, her eyes, the same shade of blue as mine, wide and earnest. "We don't want the government taking a huge chunk of what Dad worked so hard to build for us, do we?" "For us." The words hung in the air. I was tired. So deeply tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones and makes the simple act of standing feel like a monumental effort. I'd spent a lifetime deferring to James, to his plans, his moods, his pronouncements. Trusting others was a habit, a survival mechanism. And this was Emma, my daughter, my only child, the baby girl whose face I had memorized, whose tiny hand I had held. Grief makes you vulnerable. It carves out the parts of you that are capable of suspicion, leaving only raw, aching trust. "All right, dear," I said. "If you think it's for the best." She slid the pen into my hand. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen, James's pen. It felt cold, alien. I leaned over the desk, my body a fragile arc of sorrow, and signed where she pointed. My hand trembled, not from the palsy of my 80 years, but from a sudden, inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. It felt wrong. A deep, primal instinct screamed at me from somewhere buried under decades of compliance. But I pushed it down. I finished the signature. Emma's smile was brief, a flicker of something that wasn't grief. Relief, perhaps. Triumph. She gathered the papers with swift, efficient movements. "Thank you, Mom. You're so strong. Now you don't have to worry about a thing." She leaned in and kissed my cheek. Her lips were cool. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving me alone in the silent, oppressive study. I sank into James's imposing leather chair. It was cold and unyielding, molded to his body, not mine. I looked at the indent my signature had left on the blotter, a faint scar on the green felt. That signature wasn't a formality. It wasn't protection. It was the trigger for my own execution, the silent, bloodless beginning of the end of my life as I knew it. I just didn't know it yet. The days that followed were a blur of quiet emptiness. The flowers wilted, their scent turning sour. The condolence cards stopped arriving. The house, which had always felt too large, too much a reflection of James's ego, now felt cavernous, an echo chamber for my own loneliness. I moved through the rooms like a tourist, touching furniture that felt like it belonged to someone else. I tried to find my footing in this new, husbandless world, but the ground kept shifting beneath me. Then, exactly 1 week after the funeral, the first tremor of the earthquake that would demolish my world arrived. It came in a crisp, cream-colored envelope, delivered by a mailman who didn't look me in the eye. The letterhead was from a financial institution I'd never heard of, Apex Lending Solutions. The language was cheerful, impersonal. It was a letter of congratulations. It was addressed to me, Mia Thompson. It informed me that my application for a home equity loan had been approved, my loan of $950,000. I read the sentence again and again. The numbers swam before my eyes, meaningless, monstrous. $950,000. It was an amount of money that felt like a fiction. I had never applied for a loan in my life. James handled all the finances. He used to pat me on the head and say I didn't need to worry my pretty little head about numbers. It was condescending, but I had accepted it. It was part of the gilded cage he'd built for me. My blood didn't just run cold. It felt like it had turned to slush in my veins. I dropped the letter onto the kitchen table as if it were on fire. My first thought was that it was a mistake, a scam. Some kind of sophisticated phishing attempt targeting a grieving widow. But the letter was too specific. It referenced my property address. It was professionally printed on heavy bond paper. I picked up the phone, my fingers fumbling with the keypad, and called Emma. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright, busy. "Mom, hi, how are you holding up?" "Emma," I said, my own voice a strangled rasp that didn't sound like me. I received a letter from a bank. Apex Lending. There was a brief pause on the other end. Not a pause of confusion, but a pause of calculation. "Oh, that? Yes, I was going to talk to you about that. Don't worry about it." "Don't worry about it?" I clutched the letter, the paper crinkling in my fist. "It says I've been approved for a loan, for almost $1 million. Emma, what is this?" "It's just a modern financial strategy, Mom," she said, her tone breezy, as if she were explaining a new feature on a smartphone. "We're leveraging the house's value. We unlock the equity. It's all perfectly normal. The money is going into a trust." "A trust?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "The trust from the papers I signed?" "Exactly. The one for my family," she said. And the distinction was a slap in the face. My family, not our family, not hers and mine, just hers. A cold, hard wall had just been erected between us, and I was on the outside. The pieces started to click into place, each one a shard of ice in my heart. The papers at the funeral, her insistence, the speed of it all. "You used my identity," I whispered, the horror of it dawning on me. "Those papers, they weren't for taxes, were they?" "Mom, you're being dramatic. It was a power of attorney. It just allowed me to handle these complex financial matters for you. You signed it. It's all legal." Legal. The word was a weapon. They had used my grief, my trust, my decades of practiced passivity, and forged it into a key. A key to my home. A key to my life. They had bought my own home out from under me, using its own value as the ammunition. The home James and I built. The home where I raised my daughter. The home I thought was my final sanctuary. The one place on earth I belonged. I hung up the phone without another word. The conversation wasn't enough. I needed to see her face. I drove to the house, my house, on autopilot. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, a stark contrast to the maelstrom inside me. When I pulled into the driveway, Emma's car was there, along with Liam's sleek black SUV. The front door was ajar. I could hear their voices from inside, animated, excited. I pushed the door open and walked into the living room. They were standing by the large bay window, looking out at the garden. A roll of wallpaper samples was unfurled on the coffee table. Liam, my son-in-law, a man whose ambition always seemed to burn a little too hot behind his placid smile, was pointing towards the wall where James's portrait hung. "That's the first thing to go," he was saying. "And we can knock out this wall, create a proper open concept space." Emma nodded in agreement, a small, pleased smile on her face. They looked like they belonged there. They looked like the new owners. They turned when they heard me, their expressions shifting. Emma's smile tightened. Liam's became one of strained patience. "Mom," Emma said, her voice losing its earlier breeziness, replaced by a firm parental tone. "You should have called." "This is my house, Emma," I said, the words tasting foreign in my mouth. "I don't need to call." I held up the letter. "Explain this, to my face." Emma sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation of forbearance. She exchanged a look with Liam, a silent communication that excluded me entirely. It was the look of two zookeepers discussing a difficult animal. "We tried to explain it on the phone, Mia," Liam said, using my first name, which he rarely did. It was a deliberate act of repositioning our relationship. I was no longer the matriarch. I was just Mia, a problem to be managed. "The house is too much for you. The upkeep, the stairs, the memories. It's not healthy for you to be rattling around in this big old place by yourself." "So you stole it?" The question was raw, stripped of all politeness. "We didn't steal it," Emma snapped, her composure finally cracking. "We secured it. For our future, for our children. We are taking care of you. You're getting old, Mom. You're forgetful. You can't manage this place anymore. It's a burden." Every word was a carefully aimed dart. Old, forgetful, a burden. She was building a cage of my own perceived inadequacies around me. "So, where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Emma's eyes, once my baby girl's eyes, the ones that had looked up at me with pure, unconditional love, were now as hard and cold as river stones. She took a step towards me, her expression softening into a grotesque parody of concern. "We've taken care of everything," she said soothingly. "We found you a lovely room at the Scarlet Meadows Senior Living Facility. It's supposed to be one of the best. They have activities and nurses. It's for the best, Mom. Truly." Scarlet Meadows. I'd seen the billboards, manicured lawns and smiling silver-haired residents playing shuffleboard. It was a waiting room for death, painted in cheerful pastels. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. They weren't just taking my house. They were taking my autonomy, my dignity, my past, and my future. They were erasing me. I looked from my daughter's unyielding face to my son-in-law's smug one. They had planned this. They had waited for my husband to die, waited for me to be at my most vulnerable, and then they had struck. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were floating above the scene, watching a particularly ugly play. The woman standing there, speechless and shattered, was someone else. I felt the floorboards beneath my feet, the solid oak that James had chosen, and I realized they were no longer mine. Nothing was mine. They gave me 2 weeks. 2 weeks to pack up a lifetime and condense it into a few cardboard boxes suitable for a single room in a senior living facility. The phrase itself was an insult, a euphemism designed to soften the harsh reality of being put out to pasture. Emma and Liam were models of brisk, unsentimental efficiency. They offered to help, which meant standing over me, pointing at cherished possessions and asking, "Are you really going to need that, Mom?" Each question was a small act of violence, a chipping away at my history. The grand piano James had bought me for our 10th anniversary? "No room for that, Mom. We'll sell it for you. Put the money in your account." The collection of first edition novels I'd spent decades acquiring. So dusty. And you can get ebooks at Scarlet Meadows. I learned to pack at night when they were gone. The house was quiet then, except for the groans and sighs of a structure that seemed to be mourning with me. I moved through the silent rooms, the moonlight striping the floors, and sorted through the artifacts of my existence. A faded photograph of me as a young woman, my smile genuine and unburdened. A tiny silver locket containing a curl from Emma's first haircut. I held it in my palm, the metal cool against my skin, and the grief was so sharp, so specific, it felt like I was being stabbed. This grief wasn't for James, it was for the daughter I thought I had, the love I thought was real. The hardest part was James's office. It was the heart of the house and the heart of his secrets. I hadn't truly entered the room in decades. It was his sanctuary, a place where he did his work. He'd close the heavy door, and the sounds of his late-night projects would be muffled, distant. I never questioned it. A good wife in his world did not question her husband. Now I had to dismantle it. I had to pack up the life of the man who had defined mine, while simultaneously being evicted by the daughter we had created. The irony was a bitter pill. The room was just as he'd left it. Books on architecture and engineering lined the walls from floor to ceiling. His heavy mahogany desk was neat, his pens arranged in a perfect row. It felt like a shrine, and my presence felt like a desecration. I started with the bookshelves, pulling down heavy volumes, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light from the window. As I reached for a thick tome on structural mechanics on the bottom shelf, my hand brushed against the wood paneling behind it. It moved. It was just a slight give, a tiny shifting that no one would ever notice unless they were touching it directly. My heart gave a little thump. Curiosity, an emotion I hadn't felt in a long time, pricked at me. I pushed the book back in and pulled out the ones next to it, clearing the space. I ran my fingers along the edges of the panel. There was a seam, almost invisible. Using my fingernails, I pried at it. It was stiff, but it gave way, swinging inward on a small, hidden hinge. Inside, there was no safe, no stash of forgotten money, just a dark, dusty cavity. And in the center of it, standing on its end, was a heavy, rolled-up tube of thick draftsman's paper, bound with a faded red ribbon. My first thought was relief. It was probably just old blueprints for the house, forgotten plans from its construction 60 years ago. A piece of history, a harmless relic. I pulled the tube out. It was heavier than I expected. I carried it over to the floor, the only clear space in the cluttered room, and carefully untied the brittle ribbon. It crumbled in my fingers. I unrolled the stiff paper. It crackled in protest, fighting me, as if it didn't want its contents to be seen. They were blueprints, but they were unlike any I had ever seen. The outline was my house, the familiar L shape, the placement of the windows, the grand staircase. But overlaid on this familiar map was a second, secret architecture. The drawings were meticulous, rendered with James's trademark precision. They depicted rooms that didn't exist. A long, narrow corridor running beneath the main hallway, leading to a square chamber deep in the foundation, a room with no windows and no doors on the main plans. There were strange, complex diagrams of ventilation systems that seemed to serve only this hidden space. The margins were filled with annotations, but not in any language I recognized. It was a code, a series of symbols and numbers that were perfectly ordered and utterly alien. I unrolled sheet after sheet. Each one detailed another aspect of the secret construction: electrical wiring diagrams, soundproofing specifications, a notation about reinforced concrete walls. The designs were for this house, my house, yet they were for a version of it that was a complete nightmare. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some early rejected draft, a flight of fancy? But the level of detail, the sheer obsessive precision, felt too real, too purposeful. I got to the last sheet. It was a detailed drawing of the hidden square chamber, and at the bottom of the page, in James's familiar, sharp, angular handwriting, was a single, chilling phrase. It wasn't a technical note. It was a title. Opus 17, The Evelyn Configuration. The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. My blood turned to ice. Evelyn. Evelyn wasn't an architect. She wasn't a design concept. Evelyn Sorensen was a girl A girl who had vanished from our town, Evergreen Pines, 40 years ago. It had been the biggest news story for a year. A pretty, vibrant 19-year-old who went out one evening and never came home. They searched the woods, the rivers. They questioned everyone. But she was just gone. Her disappearance became a local legend, a ghost story. Parents told their children to make them come home before dark. And her name was here, on a blueprint for a secret, soundproofed room in the foundation of my home, written in my husband's hand. Opus 17, like a piece of music or a work of art. The word configuration suddenly seemed vile, inhuman. My mind reeled, trying to reject the monstrous implication, but the connection was there, undeniable, like a black thread stitching two horrible realities together. These weren't blueprints. This was a tombstone, and I had been living on top of it for 40 years. The floor beneath me no longer felt solid. The walls of the office seemed to close in, and for the first time, I understood the faint metallic tang I could never place. It was the smell of a secret, the smell of a tomb. The color of my world had become beige, a flat, lifeless beige that smelled of disinfectant and quiet despair. Scarlet Meadows wasn't a home. It was a waiting room for the end, a place where memories were managed with medication and daylight was filtered through sanitized blinds. The staff were professional in their cheerfulness, a performance that felt more insulting than neglect. They called me dear and sweetie, their voices laced with the pity reserved for the senile and the forgotten. In their eyes, I was already a ghost, a story that had reached its final, uninteresting chapter. And then, Noah came. He was the only one. Emma and Liam were too busy with their new life, the life they had purchased with my signature. But Noah, my grandson, drove 2 hours every weekend. He'd walk into my room, a lanky 19-year-old trying to fold his frame into the small, uncomfortable guest chair, and the beige would recede. He'd bring me coffee from a place that wasn't the facility's lukewarm brown water and talk about his classes, about a girl he liked, about the absurdities of the digital world that I could barely comprehend. He didn't treat me like a porcelain doll. He saw me. One Tuesday, a non-visiting day, he showed up unannounced. He found me staring out the window at a manicured lawn I was forbidden to walk on without supervision. He didn't say anything at first, just came and stood beside me. "This is wrong, Grandma," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Everything about this is wrong." He reached over and put his hand over mine where it rested on the windowsill. His hand was warm, real. "Mom, she shouldn't have done this. Liam is just... he goes along with whatever she wants." I turned from the window and looked at him. His eyes, a clear, deep blue so unlike his mother's, were filled with a genuine anger on my behalf. It was the first time anyone had validated the screaming injustice I felt trapped inside me. My own daughter had put me here, sold my life out from under me, and her son was the only one who saw the crime for what it was. For days, I had clutched the secret of the blueprints to my chest like a prayer or a curse. I was terrified that if I showed them to anyone, it would be the final piece of evidence Emma needed to prove I was losing my mind. Paranoid delusions. The phrase from her threatening phone call echoed in my head. But looking at Noah, at the unwavering loyalty in his gaze, I made a decision. It wasn't a calculated risk. It was a leap of faith. "There's something I need to show you," I whispered, my voice raspy from disuse. I led him to the small dresser, the only piece of my old life they'd allowed me to keep. From beneath a stack of sweaters that still faintly smelled of the cedar closets in my home, I pulled out the rolled-up schematics. I spread them on the small particle board table, the paper crinkling with a sound that seemed deafening in the silence of the room. I watched his face, bracing for confusion, for pity, for the gentle suggestion that I should talk to a doctor. He leaned over the pages, his brow furrowed. He traced the strange lines with his finger, his eyes scanning the coded annotations and the bizarre room layouts. He was silent for a long time. The beige of the room seemed to be closing in again, my breath catching in my throat. Then he looked up, and his eyes weren't filled with pity. They were wide with a sharp, analytical curiosity. "Grandma, what did you say these were?" "I thought they were old blueprints of the house. James, your grandfather. He was an architect. I found them hidden in his office. They're not blueprints, he said, his voice electric with discovery. I mean, they look like it, but the scale is wrong. The notations. This isn't standard architectural marking. It's too complex, too repetitive. He pulled out his phone, a sleek black rectangle that seemed like a piece of alien technology in this place. Look at this section here. See this pattern of symbols and how it repeats over here, but with a different numerical prefix? He zoomed in with his phone's camera, capturing the intricate details. This is a cipher. It's like lore from a video game, or an ARG, an alternate reality game. It's a code, Grandma. It's meant to hide something. He straightened up, his eyes locked on mine. Opus 17, Configuration Evelyn. He read the script at the bottom of the page. That's not a construction term. That's a title. He took a picture of the entire scroll, section by section, his movements quick and precise. I can work on this. There's software, decryption programs. I can run the symbols through a database, look for patterns. Who is Evelyn? I don't know. I lied, the name sending a cold shiver down my spine. A ghost from a 40-year-old headline. A girl who vanished. It doesn't matter for now, he said, his mind already racing. I'll take these photos. I'll work on it from my dorm. We can talk every day. He looked from the phone back to me, and the anger was back in his eyes, but now it was focused. It had a purpose. We're going to figure out what this is, I promise. He squeezed my hand again before he left, a silent pact between us. As the door clicked shut behind him, I stood over the brittle paper, over the elegant spidery handwriting of my dead husband. For the first time since James's funeral, a new emotion pushed through the thick, suffocating fog of grief and despair. It was hot and sharp and clean. It was rage. It felt like breathing again. That first spark of rage became our secret project, a lifeline thrown across the digital void between his world and mine. The days at Scarlet Meadows, once an endless beige blur, now had a rhythm. I'd wake before the nurses started their rounds, my mind already working. After the forced breakfast and the patronizing morning activities, I would retreat to my room, open the tablet Noah had smuggled in for me, and wait for his call. He was brilliant. He attacked the cipher with the relentless energy only a 19-year-old can possess. He set up a secure server, downloaded decryption software I couldn't even pronounce, and spent his nights sifting through patterns of symbols while I provided the context. We were a strange team, the forgotten old woman and the digital native, piecing together a puzzle 40 years cold. Okay, Grandma, his voice would crackle through the tablet's small speaker, his face a pixelated image from his cluttered dorm room. I've isolated a recurring symbol cluster. It appears 23 times. Each time, it's followed by a date and a series of geographical coordinates. My role was to be the memory, the archivist of a life I was only now beginning to understand. Tell me the first date, Noah. March 12, 1983. I closed my eyes, letting the sterile air of my room fade away, and traveled back. 1983. The year we'd had the big fight about the basement. James had started his workshop expansion, he'd called it. He'd hired a special crew, not his usual contractors, men who came only at night. He'd told me it was for a sensitive project, a government bid that required absolute secrecy. When I'd asked more, he'd given me that look, the one that froze the words in my throat. That was the year a girl went missing from the diner on Route 9, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Her name was Sarah. She worked the late shift. It was all over the papers for months. There was a frantic clicking of a keyboard on Noah's end. A few seconds of silence. Holy hell, Grandma. Sarah Jenkins. The coordinates on the blueprint. There for a wooded rest stop a mile from that diner. That was the first one. The first opus. The first time the cold code on the page bled into a human life. After that, the dam broke. Each evening brought a new horror. Noah would feed me a date or a string of symbols, and I would dive back into the labyrinth of my memory, connecting the abstract data to a face from a missing person poster, a half-forgotten news story, a whisper of town gossip. Opus 5, the college student from the library. I remember James complaining about her car being parked in his spot for a week before it was towed. Opus 12, the woman who was jogging by the reservoir. James had taken up fishing there that summer. He never caught a thing, he said. The blueprints were not blueprints. They were journals. They were trophies. James hadn't just been an architect of buildings. He had been the architect of death. His elegant script and precise drawings didn't depict rooms and support beams. They depicted the unspeakable. Each configuration was a detailed, grotesque account of his crimes. He wrote with the detached precision of an engineer, noting times, methods, and his own emotional state with chilling objectivity. He was a predator, a monster who had hidden for decades behind a veneer of civic duty, charitable donations, and family values. The most monstrous revelation was the location, the secret room. It wasn't just in the house. It was the house's dark heart. The schematic showed a hidden chamber built into the very foundations, accessible only through a false wall in the back of his basement workshop. It was soundproofed, reinforced, with its own ventilation and plumbing that bypassed the main house systems. He'd designed and built a tomb right under our feet. For 40 years, I had lived, slept, and raised my children directly above a slaughterhouse. I thought of the dinner parties we'd hosted, the laughter and clinking glasses upstairs, while unimaginable suffering took place just a few feet below. I thought of Christmases, of birthdays, of Emma taking her first steps on the living room floor. All of it, our entire life, was a facade built on a mass grave. The family fortune, the sterling reputation, the very bricks and mortar of that house were cemented with the bones and blood of at least 24 women. The truth, when it finally coalesced from the fragments of code and memory, was not a single shattering blow. It was a slow, systemic poison, seeping into every memory I had of my marriage, of my life. The monster's words didn't just tell his story, they unlocked my own. The journals were a key, and they turned a lock in my mind, throwing open a door to a room full of things I had forced myself to forget. I remembered the smells. For years, I had battled a faint, intermittent odor in the basement. I'd blamed it on dampness, on old pipes, on anything and everything. I'd used bleach, ammonia, air fresheners, but it always returned. A strange, coppery chemical scent. The smell of frantic, industrial-scale cleaning. I remembered his late-night projects. He'd lock the basement door, and I'd hear the low hum of power tools, the sound of running water at odd hours. If I ever asked, he'd say he was working on a model, or perfecting a new design. An artist needs his solitude, Mia, he'd say with a patronizing smile. It was a warning, not an explanation. And then, a memory I had buried deeper than all the others clawed its way to the surface. It was from our 10th year of marriage. I was putting away his laundry when something fell from his coat pocket. It was a locket, a small silver heart, not expensive, but clearly personal. It wasn't mine. I waited until he came home, my own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I held it out to him in the palm of my hand. "James," I started, my voice shaking. "I found this." The change was instantaneous and terrifying. The charming, affable husband I knew vanished, replaced by a stranger. His face became a mask of cold fury. His eyes, usually warm and crinkling at the corners when he smiled, turned flat and dead. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He took a step toward me, and the air in the room grew thick and cold. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low, a venomous hiss. It fell from your coat." He snatched it from my hand, his fingers closing around it in a fist. He looked at me, and in that moment, I saw the monster. I saw a capacity for violence that was absolute. He didn't lay a hand on me, but he didn't need to. The threat was a physical force in the room, pressing on my chest, stealing my breath. He held my gaze for a long, silent moment, and in that silence, a contract was signed. I would not ask. I would not look. I would not know. To do so would be to invite that cold, violent rage into my own life. I lowered my eyes, and he turned and walked away. We never spoke of it again. The memory, and the question it represented, was buried. My silence was the price of my survival. With that memory came another, even more damning. Emma. She must have been 16. I remember the day clearly, the scent of rain on the hot asphalt of the driveway. I had picked her up from her debate club practice. As she slid into the passenger seat of James's sedan, which I'd borrowed for the day, she dropped her bag on the floor. When she bent to pick it up, she froze. I saw her hand hover over the floor mat. She picked something up, something small and metallic that glinted in the afternoon light. It was an earring, a delicate silver hoop with a small turquoise bead. It wasn't hers. It wasn't mine. I watched her in the rearview mirror. I saw the flicker of confusion on her face, followed by a dawning, horrified comprehension. Her face went pale. For a moment, I thought she would show it to me, that she would ask the question I had been too afraid to ask for years. But she didn't. Her fingers closed around the earring. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable, and then she quickly, quietly, opened the glove compartment and dropped it inside, pushing it to the back behind the car's manual and a pile of old receipts. She closed the door with a soft, final click. She knew. Maybe she didn't know the whole truth, the sheer scale of the horror, but she knew enough. She knew there were other women. She knew our father, our husband, was not the man he pretended to be. She knew our comfort, our beautiful house, our respected name, was paid for by a dark and terrible secret. And she chose comfort. She chose silence. She chose to put the evidence back in its box and pretend she'd never seen it. Suddenly, the $950,000 loan wasn't just about greed. It was about preservation. It was a desperate, final act of complicity. Owning the house, the physical container of all those secrets, was the only way she could be sure they would stay buried forever. She wasn't just evicting her mother. She was buying the tomb. Emma must have sensed the shift in me, the new rigidity in my spine that even the beige walls of Scarlet Meadows couldn't soften. Perhaps I was less compliant on the phone. Perhaps a nurse made an offhand comment about my sudden interest in the tablet Noah had brought me. Whatever the reason, her next move was as predictable as it was vicious. It arrived not as a phone call, but as a thick manila envelope delivered by a courier. Inside was a petition for conservatorship. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was brutally clear. My daughter, Emma Croft, was petitioning the court to take full control of my life, my finances, my medical decisions, my legal rights. The petition, filed by a shark of a lawyer named Oliver Vance, cited my increasingly erratic behavior, my paranoid delusions concerning the family home, and my inability to care for myself or manage my own affairs. They were going to have me declared legally incompetent. They wanted to make me a ghost before I was even dead, stripping me of my own voice so that only their version of the story could ever be told. A cold, clear fury, unlike anything I had ever felt, washed over me. And this wasn't just an attack. It was a declaration of war. My fear, the companion that had silenced me for 40 years, finally burned away, leaving behind a diamond-hard resolve. Emma had made her first real mistake. By trying to legally erase me, she had forced me to fight back. I needed a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but someone who would believe me, someone with a reason to fight as hard as I needed to. The name came to me not from a memory, but from the pages of the decoded journal. Opus 17. Configuration Evelyn. Evelyn Harper. Not the victim, but her aunt. I remembered the name from the old news articles Noah had unearthed. Evelyn Harper was a retired litigator, a name once whispered with respect and a little bit of fear in the county courthouse. She had been relentless in pressing the police about her niece's disappearance, always publicly stating her deep suspicion of James, who had been a person of interest but was quickly cleared. She had never believed it. Finding her was easy. A quick search by Noah gave me her number. Making the call was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My hand trembled as I dialed, my throat tight. What would I say? How could I make her believe that the man she suspected was not only guilty, but was a monster beyond her worst imagining? What if she blamed me? The phone rang 3 times before a woman answered, her voice crisp and questioning. Harper. Ms. Harper? I began, my own voice a reedy whisper. You don't know me. My name is Mia Croft. Silence. A heavy, weighted silence that stretched for an eternity. I could feel her mind working, connecting my name to James. I was married to James Croft, I pushed on, forcing the words out. I'm calling about your niece, Evelyn. I think I know what happened to her. Another long pause. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of all warmth. It was the voice of a predator that has caught a scent. Where are you? We met 2 days later. She didn't want to meet at Scarlet Meadows, and I refused to let her see me in that beige prison. Noah arranged it. He drove me to a small, independent coffee shop in a neighboring town. Evelyn Harper was already there, sitting in a booth in the back corner. She was older now, her hair a sharp, elegant silver, but her eyes were exactly as I'd seen them in the old newspaper photos. Intelligent, penetrating, and utterly unforgiving. I sat down opposite her. Noah placed a thick file folder on the table between us and then retreated to a nearby table, a silent guardian. I have listened to crackpots, grieving parents, and conspiracy theorists talk about my niece's case for 40 years, Mrs. Croft. Evelyn began, her voice low and dangerous. Most of them want money or attention. Tell me why you're different. I didn't try to explain. I didn't make excuses for my years of silence. I simply pushed the folder toward her. This is why. She opened it. Inside were printouts, page after page of James's coded journals, with Noah's neat typed translations clipped to each one. I watched her face as she read. I saw the initial skepticism melt into confusion, then dawn into horrified recognition. Her professional composure, the armor of a veteran lawyer, cracked. She read about the configurations, the grotesque details of his methods. Her hand started to shake, just slightly. Her breath hitched. When she finally reached the page titled Opus 17, Configuration Evelyn, a single, silent tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She closed her eyes for a long moment, composing herself. When she opened them again, the grief was still there, a raw and terrible wound. But it was surrounded by something else, something cold and focused and utterly lethal. The tear had dried, but her eyes shone with a diamond-hard fire. She looked past me, at Noah, then back to me. She closed the folder. They are petitioning for conservatorship, I said quietly. They say I'm having paranoid delusions about the house. Evelyn Harper gave a short, mirthless laugh. Of course they are. That house is a crime scene, a mausoleum. They need you silenced before the ghosts start to talk. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. The grief had been forged into a weapon. We won't just fight this, Mia, she said, her voice dropping to a low, powerful whisper that promised retribution. We will burn them to the ground with the truth. The air in Evelyn Harper's office was different. It didn't smell of stale paper and old coffee like other law offices. It smelled of lemon polish and resolve. The afternoon sun cut a sharp, unforgiving line across her mahogany desk, illuminating a fine layer of dust dancing in the air. Evelyn leaned forward, her hands steepled. She wasn't a comforting woman. She was a weapon, and she was offering to be aimed. They think you're a grieving widow losing her mind, Mia, she said, her voice low and even, devoid of pity. That was a relief. Pity was a cage of its own. They're using your grief as a hammer to shatter your credibility. Every time you fight, every time you raise your voice, you're just proving their point. I looked down at my hands, resting in my lap. They were knotted with age, the skin thin as parchment. I'd used these hands to bake Emma's birthday cakes, to soothe her fevers, to applaud at her recitals. Now she wanted a court to declare them incompetent. So I should do nothing? I asked, the words tasting like ash. I should let her win? No, Evelyn said, a flicker of something sharp in her eyes. You let her think. She's won. There's a world of difference. Right now, you're playing chess on her board, by her rules. She anticipates your moves because you're doing exactly what a cornered, frantic person would do. We're going to stop playing her game. We're going to burn her board. She pushed a file across the desk. It wasn't a legal document. It was a single sheet of paper with a psychiatrist's letterhead. Dr. Alistair Finch. I recognized the name. He was the one Emma had hired for the competency hearing. Dr. Finch will describe you as suffering from persecutory delusions, exacerbated by grief. He will say you've invented a Baroque conspiracy to cope with the loss of your husband and the perceived betrayal of your daughter. She paused, letting the clinical cruelty of the words sink in. He's going to paint you as a pitiable, confused old woman. And you, Mia, you are going to be his masterpiece. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. You want me to pretend? To be what she says I am? I want you to be a ghost, Evelyn corrected. Powerless, forgettable, harmless. Emma doesn't want to fight you. She wants to manage you. She wants to put you in a box, label it handled, and get on with her life. A fierce, righteous mother is a problem. A senile, broken one is a tragedy she can perform for her friends. Let her have her performance. Let her take her bow. The idea was abhorrent. It was a violation of the very fire that had been rekindled within me. The woman who had deciphered James's monstrous chronicles was now being asked to play the fool. But as I looked at Evelyn's unblinking gaze, I saw the brutal logic. Emma was swatting at a fly. As long as I kept buzzing, she'd keep swatting. If I fell to the floor and played dead, she'd walk away, satisfied. What about the house? I whispered. She'll have it. She and Liam will be in there, living. Let them, Evelyn said, the words sharp as glass. Let them move in. Let them tear down walls and pick out new curtains. Let them feel the weight of ownership. Let them plan a party to show off their new kingdom. People are never more careless than when they believe they are completely secure. They think they're burying a secret, Mia. We're going to let them dig their own graves, fill them with debt, and then hand them the shovels to cover themselves. The competency hearing was a masterclass in humiliation. I allowed the nurse from Scarlet Meadows to wheel me into the small, sterile courtroom. I wore a gray cardigan that Noah had said made me look washed out. I let my hair remain unkempt. I didn't meet Emma's eyes, but I could feel her gaze on me, a cloying, performative sympathy that was for the benefit of the judge. Liam stood beside her, his hand on her back, playing the part of the supportive husband burdened by his mother-in-law's tragic decline. Dr. Finch took the stand. He spoke in a calm, patronizing drone, his words weaving a cocoon of clinical diagnosis around me. Mrs. Sterling is exhibiting classic signs of delusional paranoia, a complex narrative constructed to shield her from the trauma of her husband's passing. She fixates on the house, a common psychological anchor, imbuing it with sinister, unfounded properties. He talked about James's blueprints. She interprets these architectural drawings, quite mundane in nature, as a sort of coded confession. A flight of fancy, Your Honor. A cry for attention, perhaps, from a woman feeling increasingly isolated. When it was my turn, Emma's lawyer approached me with the gentleness one reserves for a frightened animal. Mrs. Sterling, he began, his voice syrupy. Can you tell the court why you believe your daughter is trying to harm you? I looked at him, my eyes wide and unfocused. I let my mouth tremble slightly. She wants the house, I murmured, my voice a frail thread of sound. James left things. In the walls. He told me, no, he wrote it. I trailed off, looking toward the window as if distracted by a bird. I appeared to be grasping at fragments of a fractured reality, just as they expected. Wrote what, Mrs. Sterling? The lawyer pressed gently. I looked at Emma. For a single fleeting second, I let my focus sharpen, a spark of the real me cutting through the fog. I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes before I let the vacant look return. Secrets, I whispered, and then I shook my head, a gesture of pathetic confusion. I'm very tired. Can I go back to my room now? It was perfect. I was dismissed, not as a credible witness, but as a fragile relic to be handled with care. The judge looked at me with an expression of profound pity. He looked at Emma with sympathy. She won. 2 days later, she called me at Scarlet Meadows. Her voice was bright, relieved, the voice of someone who had just solved a tedious logistical problem. Mom. I just wanted to let you know. I've instructed my lawyer to drop the conservatorship petition. Oh, I said, my voice intentionally flat. Yes, the hearing. It made me realize you just need peace. You need to be looked after without all this stress. Fighting isn't good for you. Liam and I, we just want what's best. The cost of what's best is $950,000, I thought. That's good, dear, I said aloud. We're going to start the renovations next week, she chirped. Just opening up the main floor. It's so dated, and we're planning a little get-together in a few weeks, a housewarming, to clear out the old energy and start fresh. You'll have to come, of course. We'll arrange for a car. A housewarming, a party on top of a mass grave. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't just burying the past. They were dancing on it. They were clinking champagne glasses over the bones of James's victims. That sounds lovely, Emma, I said. And the lie was so smooth it scared even me. I was letting them dig, and I was sharpening the shovels. From my window at Scarlet Meadows, I couldn't see the house, but I could feel its violation across town. Noah was my eyes and ears. He would visit me after his classes, his face a mixture of anger and grim determination. He was my co-conspirator, my agent in a world I could no longer physically navigate. They've got a dumpster in the driveway the size of a bus, he told me one afternoon, scrolling through photos on his phone. He showed me. The grand facade of my home was marred by a huge, ugly metal container. They're gutting the kitchen. Liam was out there talking to some contractor about taking out the wall between the dining room and the living room, said he wanted an open concept for entertaining. Entertaining. The word was a profanity. That night, after Noah left, I sat in the dark of my small room, the decoded transcripts of James's journals spread before me. Opus 12. The dancer's ankle. A delicate break. She fought harder than the others. The soundproofing held. I thought of Liam, with his easy smile and expensive suits, talking about open concepts, standing on the very floorboards that had absorbed the silent screams of 24 women. I thought of Emma, my Emma, choosing paint swatches and planning a guest list, her willful ignorance a shield against a truth that would incinerate her. They thought they were renovating a house. They had no idea they were living inside the evidence. A few days later, Noah came to me with an idea. He was sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling restlessly through his phone. The screen cast a blue glow on his young, intense face. "Grandma," he said, looking up. "We have the truth, but we can't just drop it. It's too big. People won't believe it. They'll believe Emma's story, that you're crazy. We need to prepare them. We need to plant a seed." "What kind of seed?" I asked. He held up his phone. "The internet," he said. "It's a ghost story waiting to be told. We don't accuse. We don't present evidence. We just whisper." And so, At Evergreen Architect was born. It was Noah's creation, a ghost in the machine we built together. He sat with me for hours, a notepad between us, as we carefully curated the first wave of whispers. We chose phrases from the journals, stripped of context, that were both poetic and terrifying. We would turn James's private lexicon of murder into a public folklore of dread. The account's first post went up on a quiet Tuesday night. It was just text on a black background. Opus 3, The Scarlet Brooch. A glint of red in the damp earth by the river. Never claimed. Silence. For a day, nothing. Then, a few likes. A comment from someone in town. "Is this about that girl who went missing in the 80s? The one from Northwood High?" The next day, another post. Configuration 9. Below the weeping willow. The roots run deep. So does the silence. This time, the reaction was faster. Dozens of replies. "What house is this about? This is creepy. Is this some kind of ARG?" Noah had to explain to me that an ARG was an alternate reality game, a kind of interactive fiction. "That's perfect," I'd said. "Let them think it's a game." Noah, a film student, took it a step further. He started making short, unnerving videos for TikTok and Instagram Reels. He took the digital copies of James's blueprints I had on a flash drive and brought them to life. In one video, the camera pans slowly over the intricate lines of the foundation plan. As it passes over the location of the hidden room, the image glitches, distorting into a horrifying digital smear. Over the video, he layered a distorted audio clip from a 1994 local news report about a missing college student. Her name now lost to most, but not to me. Not anymore. The videos went viral. The first one hit 100,000 views in a day, the second 250,000. The digital seance had begun. The comments poured in, a torrent of speculation, fear, and morbid curiosity. User 308472. Wait. I know that house. It's the old Sterling place on the hill, the one that just sold. At True Crime. Junkie, the Opus thing is a reference to a killer's signature. I've seen this pattern before. Whoever is running this account knows something. Evergreen Pines. Local. My mom told me that house always gave her the creeps. Old man Sterling was a weirdo. Noah would show me the analytics on his phone, his eyes wide with the power of it all. Grandma, look at this. We're trending in Evergreen Pines. Local news sites are writing articles about the eerie mystery of the @Evergreen Architect account. They're all talking about it. I felt a strange, cold thrill. We were conducting an orchestra of rumor from a room in a nursing home. We were turning my prison into a command center. While Emma and Liam were picking out granite countertops, we were weaving a digital shroud around their new life. We escalated as the date of the housewarming party drew closer. Noah posted a heavily filtered photo of the house taken at dusk, making it look like a gothic nightmare. The caption was a direct quote from James's journal, a line that had chilled me to the bone when I first read it. The walls are thick, a perfect vessel for secrets. A home should be a fortress. It should protect the family from the world, and the world from the family. The post exploded. The town was no longer just whispering, it was shouting. The house on the hill, the site of the upcoming party of the year, was becoming the town's very own urban legend. Emma and Liam's grand social debut was rapidly turning into the backdrop for a horror story. They were oblivious, insulated by their own arrogance and the physical walls of their new, stolen home. They heard nothing, but soon the whispers would become a roar they couldn't possibly ignore. I watched the storm brew from my quiet room, a puppeteer pulling strings of code and fear. Emma thought she had buried me in Scarlet Meadows. She didn't realize she had just given me the time and the solitude to sharpen my axe. The final piece of the puzzle was not one of whispers or shadows, but of cold, hard law. It was Evelyn's masterstroke, a legal maneuver so elegant and brutal it took my breath away. It was a poison pill, as she'd called it, left behind by James himself, a toxic legacy I would now use to cure myself. Evelyn found it late one night, surrounded by cardboard boxes of James's old financial records that Noah had discreetly removed from the house before the renovations began. She called me the next morning, her voice crackling with the kind of intellectual excitement that was more potent than any emotional display. "I've got him, Mia," she said, and I could practically hear the predatory smile in her voice. "I've got the monster by the throat, and he's been dead for months." She laid it all out for me when I met her at her office that afternoon. On her desk were 2 documents, a property title for the house from 1983 and a series of incorporation papers for a company I'd never heard of, Opus Construction LLC. James was meticulous, Evelyn began, her finger tracing a line on the incorporation document. He was also arrogant. He wanted to compartmentalize his life, keep his hobbies separate from his family finances. When he built the secret room, he didn't pay for it out of his personal or business accounts. He funneled the money through this. She tapped the paper. A shell corporation. He paid contractors in cash, used untraceable invoices. Opus Construction built the Chamber of Horrors in your basement. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. What does that mean? It means, Evelyn said, leaning forward, her eyes glittering, that there is a fundamental, incurable flaw in the property's title history. A significant, unrecorded structural alteration was financed and executed by a third-party entity. When James died and the house passed to you, that flaw passed with it. And when Emma used your identity to secure that loan, she inherited it too. Evelyn picked up a copy of Emma's loan application, the one the bank had so readily approved. She'd gotten a copy through Discovery before we dropped the fight. Her finger jabbed at a specific section. Every mortgage application has a disclosure clause. The applicant must swear that they are aware of any and all structural anomalies, additions, or significant repairs not on the original building plan. Emma checked no. I stared at the document. It was all there. A web of lies built on a foundation of murder. But she didn't know about the room. Not for sure. It doesn't matter, Evelyn said dismissively. She knew something was wrong. You yourself remembered her finding that earring. She suspected. She chose to look away. In the eyes of the law, her willful ignorance in the pursuit of financial gain is the same as lying. She failed to perform due diligence. She fraudulently attested to the structural integrity of a property she knew, or should have known, was compromised. The bank loaned her nearly $1 million based on a lie. The beauty of it was devastating. James, in his obsessive need for secrecy, had created the very weapon that would destroy his legacy. Emma, in her greedy haste, had picked it up and pointed it at her own head. "So what do we do?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We don't go to the bank, not yet. That would be messy, and they'd try to cover their tracks. We go to a judge," Evelyn said. "We file an ex parte motion. That means we present our evidence without the other party being present or even notified. We are going to show the judge the journals, the financial trail from Opus Construction, and Emma's fraudulent loan application. We will argue that the title to the property is fundamentally contaminated and that the current occupant secured her position through deceit." "And what will we ask for?" Evelyn smiled, a thin, sharp line. "We will ask the judge to place the property at 4 and 17 Evergreen Drive into a temporary blind trust, effective immediately, to protect the asset from further fraudulent transactions. A trust whose sole trustee will be you." The silence that followed was filled with the immense gravity of her words. She was talking about taking the house back, not by fighting, not by yelling, but silently, in the secret heart of the legal system, using my enemy's own actions against them. The next 2 days were a blur of tension. Evelyn and her team worked around the clock preparing the motion. Noah was our courier, ferrying signed affidavits and notarized documents between Evelyn's office and my room at Scarlet Meadows. We were a silent, efficient machine closing in on our target. The motion was filed on a Thursday. All we could do was wait. I sat in my room, staring out the window, every ring of the phone sending a jolt through my system. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for a verdict that would decide the rest of my life. The call came on Friday afternoon, less than 24 hours before Emma's party. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling. "Mia?" Evelyn's voice was calm, but I could hear the triumph simmering beneath it. The judge signed the order. I sank onto my bed. The receiver pressed hard against my ear. "It's done," she continued. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, the title to 417 Evergreen Drive was placed into the Evergreen Pines Blind Trust. You are in control. Emma and Liam are, legally speaking, trespassing." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, the crushing weight on my chest seemed to lift. I could breathe. "They're in there right now," I said, the image vivid in my mind. "Florists are arriving. Caterers are setting up tables. They're preparing for a victory party." "I know," Evelyn said, a hint of dark amusement in her tone. Let them host their grand affair. Let them pour expensive champagne and accept the congratulations of their friends. They are now tenants in a house that is no longer theirs. They are renovating a property they do not own. They are hosts of a party on borrowed time. I thought of the Trojan horse, a beautiful gift wheeled into the city gates, celebrated by the victors. They had no idea what was hidden inside. Emma thought she was celebrating her new life, her new status, her inheritance. She had no idea that she was the one paying for the party, and the rent, a debt of nearly $1 million, was about to come due. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a trap, and the door had just been locked. The car door closed with a soft, final thud, a sound that seemed to seal the world outside. I sat for a moment in the hired town car, the leather cool against my skin, and looked at the house. My house. No, not my house anymore. It was James's house. Now, it was Emma's. Tonight, it would become something else entirely. It gleamed under the artful landscape lighting, a beautiful, predatory creature dressed for a feast. The windows were ablaze with golden light, spilling warmth onto the perfectly manicured lawns. Laughter, faint and brittle, drifted on the cool evening air. I had chosen my armor carefully, a simple charcoal gray sheath dress. No jewelry, save for my thin wedding band, which I wore now as a prop, a reminder of the role I was about to play. I was Mia, the grieving widow. Mia, the confused, defeated mother. Mia, a relic to be pitied and managed. My reflection in the darkened window was a pale, composed stranger. The woman who had wept in these rooms, who had unknowingly slept above a tomb, was gone. In her place was something forged in the fire of truth, something cold and hard and sharp. My heart wasn't racing. It was a metronome, a cold, steady drum beating out a rhythm. It ends tonight. It ends tonight. I walked up the familiar stone path, each step an echo of a life that felt like a fiction I had once read. The heavy oak door swung open before I could touch it. Emma stood there silhouetted, a vision in emerald silk. Her smile was brilliant, a masterpiece of practiced affection. "Mom," she breathed, her voice a confection of triumphant pity. "I'm so glad you could make it. I was so worried you wouldn't come." She leaned in and her lips brushed my cheek. The kiss was dry and cool, like a snake's bite. I didn't flinch. I let the poison of her hypocrisy wash over me. It had no power anymore. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound fragile, a little thin. "I wanted to see what you've done with the place." Her smile widened. It was a conqueror's smile. "Oh, Mom, you won't believe it. It's a whole new house. We've let in so much light." She took my arm, her grip proprietary, and led me inside. The wave of sound and scent was overwhelming. The cloying sweetness of 100 expensive perfumes mingled with the crisp notes of champagne and the aroma of catered delicacies. It was a desperate attempt to perfume a sepulchre, to paper over the rot in the foundations with noise and expensive taste. The foyer was crowded with the town's elite. Bankers who had approved Emma's loan, lawyers who had advised her, developers who saw the property as prime real estate. They were flies, drawn to the sweet smell of money and success, unaware they were dining on a carcass. Emma's husband Liam materialized at her side. He was beaming, his face flushed with champagne and self-satisfaction. He gave my shoulder a familiar, patronizing squeeze. "Mia, good to see you out and about, looking better." He didn't mean it. He meant I looked suitably broken, no longer a threat. "Liam," I nodded, offering a weak, watery smile I had practiced in the mirror for weeks. "Come on, let me get you a drink," he said, already steering me deeper into the throng. "You have to see the living room. We took out that whole wall you and Dad always hated. It's incredible what a little vision can do." They paraded me through the rooms like a captured battle standard, a symbol of their benevolent takeover. "This is my mother, Mia," Emma would say, to a cluster of smiling faces. "She's so proud of our new beginnings." And the faces would turn to me, their eyes filled with that same calculated pity. Poor woman, lost her husband, and now her house. At least her daughter is taking care of things. I was their convenient narrative, the sad footnote in Emma and Liam's success story. I smiled. I nodded. I let my gaze drift around the rooms as if dazed, confused by the changes, but I was seeing other things. I saw the ghost of a scratch on the floorboard near the fireplace, where a piece of evidence had been hastily kicked under a rug decades ago. I saw the wall where James used to hang his architectural awards, now covered by a bland, oversized abstract painting. I saw the exact spot in the hallway where a teenage Emma had once stood, her face pale, after finding a stranger's earring in her father's car, before she made the choice to quietly place it back in the glove compartment, to choose silence, to become an accomplice. The house was a crime scene, and they had just given it a fresh coat of paint. Liam clinked a glass with a spoon, and a hush fell over the room. He stood by the newly renovated fireplace, his arm wrapped possessively around Emma's waist. They were a portrait of modern success, young, beautiful, ruthless. "Friends, family," Liam began, his voice booming with false sincerity. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us, to celebrate new beginnings." He raised his glass. "When Emma and I decided to take on this project, we knew it was more than just a renovation. It was about honoring a legacy. James was a brilliant man, a pillar of this community. He built this house with his own 2 hands. A lie. He had overseen contractors. His hands had been busy with other, darker work. And we wanted to preserve that spirit, but also to build upon it, to create a home filled with light, laughter, and love for a new generation." He looked at me then, a magnanimous nod in my direction. "And we're so thrilled that Mia can be here to see it. To know that the home she shared with James is in loving hands, that the family legacy will continue." A smattering of polite, champagne-fueled applause. Emma beamed, squeezing his hand. They believed it. They had constructed a reality so complete, so perfectly insulated by a $950,000 loan, that they were immune to the truth. They looked at me and saw a ghost. They had no idea they were the ones who were already dead. I excused myself, murmuring something about needing some air. I found a small alcove by a bay window overlooking the darkened garden. From here I could see the grand clock on the mantelpiece, the official timekeeper of the house. James had wound it every Sunday at noon, a ritual of control. Its pendulum swung, a steady, hypnotic beat. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each swing brought the future 1 second closer. I didn't drink the champagne they had pressed into my hand. My mind was perfectly, terribly clear. I watched the partygoers. I saw the mayor laughing with the bank president who had personally signed off on Emma's fraudulent application. I saw the editor of the local paper blissfully unaware that the biggest story of her career was about to detonate in this very room. They were all complicit, in their own small ways, in their willful blindness, their eagerness to celebrate wealth without questioning its source. My phone vibrated in my small clutch. A single text from Noah. "The evergreen architect is ready to speak." I took a slow, deep breath. The air still felt thick, heavy with the ghosts of unspoken words and unshed tears. But beneath the grief, something else was stirring. A ferocious, exhilarating calm. The cold, steady drum in my chest beat on. I was not a victim in their story. I was the author of its final chapter. I just had to wait for the clock to strike 9. The grand clock on the mantel began to chime. A deep, resonant sound that cut through the chatter. 1, 2, 3. All heads turned towards it, a Pavlovian response ingrained in anyone who had ever been a guest in this house. 4, 5, 6. Liam, standing near the large wall-mounted screen, gave a theatrical wink to Emma. He raised his hands for quiet. "And now," he announced, his voice full of smug charm, "a little something special I put together for my amazing wife." A look back at our journey to get here. Emma placed a hand on her heart, her eyes shining with manufactured tears. She expected a sentimental montage. Photos of them signing papers, knocking down walls, laughing in clouds of plaster dust. A tribute to their triumph. The room fell into an expectant hush. The screen flickered. But it wasn't a home video that appeared. It was the stark, minimalist interface of a Twitter feed. Black background, white text. At the top, a username that had been whispering through the town's digital corridors for weeks. @Evergreen Architect. The profile picture was a stylized, chillingly familiar blueprint of the house's foundation. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Murmurs erupted. I saw people pulling out their phones, faces illuminated by the small screens as they recognized the feed that had become a local ghost story. Liam's smile froze, faltering. Emma's expression tightened, a knot of confusion and dawning dread. Then, they walked in. From a side door near the kitchen, 3 people emerged, 2 men and a woman. They were not guests. They were dressed in simple, severe black. They moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose, their faces impassive. The crowd instinctively parted for them, a silent sea of silk and wool making way for these somber figures. They walked to the center of the room, to a large open space in front of the fireplace, a space I had instructed the caterers to keep clear. On the polished hardwood floor, visible now to everyone, was a rectangle marked out in stark white tape, the exact dimensions of the hidden room, 10 feet by 12 feet. They stepped inside the tape, turning to face the stunned audience. They were actors, my actors, and the play was about to begin. The first actor, a man with a low, clear voice, looked out over the crowd, his gaze sweeping past them as if they weren't there. He held a single sheet of paper. "Opus 17, he said, his voice calm, conversational, and utterly chilling. It didn't echo. It was absorbed by the sudden dead silence of the room. Evelyn, May 12th, hair the color of autumn leaves. She fought. I admire that in them. It makes the eventual piece all the more profound." A collective gasp went through the room. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered on the floor with a sound like a gunshot. I saw Evelyn Harper's niece, a lawyer from the city, standing near the back. Her face was a mask of stone, but her eyes, fixed on the actors, blazed with a fire 40 years in the making. The screens around the room, which had been showing the Twitter feed, now changed. A photo of a smiling, bright-eyed young woman appeared next to the text of the journal entry. Evelyn, her high school graduation picture. The second actor, the woman, stepped forward. "Opus 21, Sarah, November 4th, she spoke of her son, asked me to let her go for his sake." An interesting appeal to a sentiment I do not possess. Her locket contained his picture, a small, insignificant treasure. Another photo flashed on the screens, Sarah, missing after her late shift at the diner. Her son was now a man in his 50s, still living a town over, still wondering. The third actor began. "Opus 24, Maria, June 30th. She smelled of rain and fear. She begged. They all beg in the end. It is the one constant. A predictable, almost tedious symphony of despair. Names, dates, details. The entries Noah and I had so painstakingly decrypted, the methodical chronicles of my husband's monstrosities, were being read aloud in the house he built, in front of the people he had fooled. The actors' voices were not dramatic. They were reporters, delivering facts. It was this cold recitation, this complete lack of emotion, that made it so horrific. They were giving voice to James's own dispassionate evil. The partygoers stood frozen, their faces a gallery of dawning horror, illuminated by the ghostly light of the screens showing the faces of the missing. The women they had dismissed as runaways, as tragedies from another time. Now, they were here. Their ghosts summoned into this gleaming, polished room. I watched Emma. Her face had collapsed. The mask of the triumphant daughter had shattered, revealing the terrified child underneath. Her skin was ashen, her mouth hung open in a silent scream. She stared at the taped-off floor, finally understanding what that space represented. The foundation of her new life was a mass grave. She looked at Liam, but he was gone, his mind clearly racing, calculating liability, escape routes. His empire was imploding. Finally, her eyes found mine across the room. They were wide with a new, profound terror, the terror of the trapped, the terror of the exposed. She wasn't looking at her defeated mother anymore. She was looking at her executioner. I walked forward. The crowd parted for me as it had for the actors. I felt their eyes on me, filled with a new awe and fear. I took the microphone from Liam's limp, unresisting hand. My own hand was perfectly steady. I looked out at the sea of pale, shocked faces. "Welcome," I said. My voice, amplified, rang through the stunned silence, clear and strong. It was a voice they had never heard from me before. "To the future site of the James Foundation for Survivors of Domestic Violence." I let the words hang in the air, a death sentence for the life they had all known. I turned my head slightly, my gaze locking onto Emma. "My daughter, Emma," I continued, my tone even, almost pleasant, "was kind enough to finance its purchase with a $950,000 loan, a truly generous act to help preserve her father's darkest work. A low, guttural sound escaped Emma's throat. I delivered the final blow. The house is no longer hers, but the debt, I paused, letting the weight of the words settle in the suffocating silence, is, please, I added, my eyes sweeping the room one last time. Enjoy the canapés. The collapse was instantaneous. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was the vacuum left by a detonation, then chaos. A woman screamed. People surged toward the doors, desperate to escape the toxic air, the tainted house. The flashing blue and red lights of police cars, tipped off by Evelyn's niece, began to strobe through the large windows, painting the horrified faces in frantic, repeating colors. The dream was over. What was left was a raw, gaping wound. It was utter, beautiful devastation. I never spoke to Emma again. There was nothing left to say. The last time I saw her face, it was on a news report, her expression hollow as she and Liam were swarmed by reporters outside a courthouse. They are buried now, not in the ground their father preferred, but in a landfill of lawsuits, public disgrace, and crippling debt. Their names, once synonymous with aspirational success in our town, are now a whispered horror story, a local legend of how evil can wear a familiar face and sleep in the house next door. The house on the hill is no longer a monument to a monster. The secret room was excavated by forensic teams, its contents finally giving peace to families who had waited decades for answers. Now, its dark secrets are exposed to the light. It is a place of healing, run by the foundation I established. Its rooms, once filled with suffocating silence and unspoken terror, now echo with counseling sessions, support groups, and sometimes even the sound of tentative laughter. It is a place where survivors are building new foundations, on the ashes of the old one. I didn't get my old life back. You can't unknow things. You can't unlive a lie that spanned a lifetime. I destroyed a part of myself to do what needed to be done, the part that believed in the goodness of my family, the part that had once been capable of blissful ignorance. That woman is as dead as James. I sit now in a small apartment by the sea, miles and a lifetime away from evergreen pines. The rooms are sparse, filled only with what I need. The air smells of salt and wet sand. There are no ghosts here, but the ones I choose to remember. Noah visits on the weekends. He's studying forensic psychology now. Sometimes we talk about his classes, about the future. Sometimes we just sit on the small balcony and watch the tide. It rolls in, relentless and steady, washing the shore clean, pulling away the debris to show the solid, unyielding truth of what lies beneath. I am free. It is not the joyful, effervescent freedom you see in movies. It's a quiet, lonely, and ferocious freedom, a peace forged in destruction, a life built from the wreckage of another. And it is entirely, unequivocally, my own. The full story of what happened in that house, the complete decrypted journals of James, are now public record. They were entered as evidence in the dozens of civil suits that followed. You can find them if you look. The James Foundation has made them accessible through a link, which you can find in the description below. Read them. Share them. Do not let the world forget the names of the women he tried to erase, the stories he tried to bury in concrete and silence. Their lives mattered. Their stories deserve to be heard, not just whispered in the dark. Click the link. Be a witness.